18 homeless, and carrying nothing but a backpack full of broken dreams. In the middle of a blazing desert, I discovered a 100-year-old abandoned bus. No shelter, no food, no future, just rust, sand, and an endless sky. But what I turned it into completely changed my life. This is a story of survival, resilience, and creating hope from nothing. Hey everyone! Before we dive in, make sure to join our YouTube family by subscribing. Don't forget to like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, let's jump straight into the story. The first morning inside the abandoned bus felt different from any morning I had experienced before. For the first time in days, I woke up without panic. Sunlight slipped through the cracked windows, drawing long golden lines across the dusty floor. The air was still dry, but the bus had protected me from the harsh night wind. As I sat up, reality returned. This place was now my only shelter, and survival depended entirely on what I did next. The bus was far from livable. Sand covered almost everything, forming small dunes between the seats. Broken glass sparkled near the windows, and pieces of metal rattled whenever the wind blew. If I wanted to stay here, cleaning had to be my first step. I searched through my backpack and found an empty plastic bottle, using a sharp edge from broken metal. I cut the bottle open and shaped it into a crude scoop. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Slowly, patiently, I began pushing sand toward the door and throwing it outside. The work was exhausting. Sweat soaked my shirt and dust filled my lungs. But every cleared space gave me a sense of progress. Hours passed before a small section of the floor became visible. I sat down to rest, breathing heavily, but I felt proud. It was the first thing I had controlled since losing my home. That small, clean area represented possibility. Over the next few days, cleaning became my routine. Wake up, clear sand, rest, repeat. I removed broken seats and stacked them carefully outside. Some were still strong enough to reuse. Others could become materials for building something new. I began to look at every piece of junk not as trash, but as a resource. Water quickly became my biggest challenge. The desert offered almost nothing freely. My bottle was nearly empty, and walking long distances every day was dangerous. I remembered survival videos I used to watch online late at night when life felt boring. Now those memories became lessons. Using plastic scraps, cloth from an old seat, and bottles I found nearby, I created a simple condensation system. At night, the cool desert air caused moisture to collect inside the plastic. In the morning, tiny droplets gathered at the bottom of the bottle. The amount was small, sometimes only a few mouthfuls, but it meant survival. Every drop felt like treasure. Food required effort and courage. I walked toward the distant road whenever my energy allowed it. Sometimes travelers ignored me. Sometimes someone offered a snack or leftover meal. Each act of kindness reminded me that even in isolation, humanity still existed. After a week, I built my first cooking spot outside the bus. I arranged stones in a circle and gathered dry branches scattered across the desert. Starting a fire took several attempts, but when flames finally appeared, I laughed out loud. It felt like reclaiming control over my life. Cooking simple food over that fire gave me warmth beyond physical hunger. It gave me confidence. One evening, dark clouds appeared on the horizon. The wind grew stronger, carrying sand through the air. Within minutes, a desert storm surrounded the bus. The metal frame shook violently, and sand blasted through broken windows like waves. Fear returned instantly. I held on to a seat as the bus rattled, convinced it might collapse. The storm lasted hours. When silence finally returned, the inside was buried again in sand. For a moment, frustration overwhelmed me. All my work seemed wasted. Then, something changed in my thinking. Instead of giving up, I treated the storm as a lesson. The bus needed reinforcement. The desert had tested my shelter, and now I understood its weaknesses. The next morning, I searched the surrounding area more carefully. I found old metal sheets, half buried in sand, pieces of wire, and torn fabric left behind by travelers. Carrying each item back to the bus felt like gathering tools for rebuilding my future. I covered broken windows with metal and secured them using wire twisted tightly by hand. Fabric became insulation against wind. I pushed heavier seats against weaker walls for support. The work was slow, but each improvement made the bus stronger. Days turned into weeks. The bus slowly transformed from a ruin into a survival shelter. I created a sleeping area using stacked seats covered with cloth. I built a small shelf from broken panels to store food and supplies. My notebook became a daily journal where I recorded every achievement: finding water, improving insulation, surviving another night. Writing helped me understand how much I was changing. Before, I had felt like a victim of circumstances. Now, I felt like a builder. Every morning brought a new goal instead of fear. The desert itself began to feel less hostile. I learned the patterns of wind, the best times to walk, and where shade lasted longest during the day. I noticed small signs of life: insects hiding under rocks, birds passing overhead at sunrise. Observing these details made me feel connected to the environment instead of threatened by it. Loneliness still visited me, especially at night. Memories of my old life returned when everything became quiet. But instead of sadness, those memories slowly turned into motivation. I wanted to prove to myself that I could survive without depending on anyone else. One evening, after finishing repairs, I stepped outside and looked at the bus. Under the fading daylight, it no longer appeared abandoned. It looked alive again, shaped by effort and determination. The metal reflected sunlight, and smoke from my small cooking fire drifted into the sky. I realized something important in that moment. I was no longer just surviving day by day. I was creating a life. The abandoned bus had become more than shelter. It was a symbol of resilience, proof that even something forgotten could be rebuilt with patience and effort. And just like the bus, I was rebuilding myself piece by piece. Standing there in the desert, watching the sky change colors, I felt stronger than I ever had before. Losing everything had forced me to discover abilities I never knew existed. For the first time since turning 18, I believed that my future might not be broken after all. Months passed before anything truly unexpected happened. By then, the abandoned bus no longer looked like a forgotten piece of metal lost in the desert. It had changed, and so had I. The exterior was still old and scarred by time, but inside it felt alive. My sleeping area was organized. Supplies were carefully stored, and the small cooking space outside had become part of my daily routine. Survival was no longer a struggle every minute. It had become a system. Each morning began with purpose. I checked my water collectors, cleaned dust from surfaces, and planned small improvements. The desert had taught me patience. Nothing changed quickly here. Progress came through consistency, not luck. One quiet morning, while preparing a small fire for breakfast, I heard something unusual: the distant sound of an engine. Vehicles rarely passed near this area, so the noise immediately caught my attention. I stepped outside and shaded my eyes against the sunlight. A vehicle was approaching slowly across the sand, leaving a trail of dust behind it. My heart raced. Part of me felt excited, another part nervous. I hadn't spoken to anyone properly in weeks. The vehicle stopped a short distance away. 3 travelers stepped out, looking around with curiosity. At first, they seemed confused, probably wondering why smoke was rising from an abandoned bus in the middle of nowhere. When they noticed me standing beside it, their expressions changed to surprise. They greeted me cautiously and asked if I really lived there. I nodded, unsure how to explain everything. Soon they were asking questions: how long I had stayed, how I survived, why I chose this place. I told them my story honestly. From the day I turned 18 to the moment I found the bus and began rebuilding it. They asked if they could see inside. When they entered, their reactions were something I would never forget. They looked around at the bed made from old seats, the water collection system, the organized supplies, and the repaired windows. One of them kept repeating how unbelievable it was. Another started recording videos on a phone. I didn't think much of it at the time. People record things all the time. Before leaving, they shared food and fresh water with me and thanked me for telling my story. As their vehicle disappeared into the desert again, silence returned. Life continued as usual for several days. Then, one afternoon, the same vehicle came back, but this time the travelers looked excited. They told me the video they recorded had been uploaded online, and thousands of people had already watched it. My story, the abandoned bus, and the transformation had inspired many viewers. Messages were pouring in from strangers around the world. Some people wanted to help. Others simply wanted to say that my determination gave them hope. I struggled to believe it. Just weeks earlier, I had felt invisible. Now people I had never met were listening to my story. Soon, small packages began arriving through travelers passing by. Tools, paint, solar lamps, blankets, and supplies appeared one by one. Each item felt unreal. With new tools, I improved the bus further. I cleaned the exterior and painted sections of rusted metal. At night, solar lights illuminated the inside, replacing darkness with warm light. The first night the lights turned on, I sat quietly and stared around the bus. Soft light reflected off the walls, and for a moment I felt emotional. This was no longer just survival. It was a home built through resilience and kindness from strangers. Visitors occasionally stopped to see the desert bus. Some came out of curiosity, others for inspiration. I shared my story many times, and each time I told it, I understood it better myself. Losing my home had forced me to discover strength I never knew I possessed. Months later, I stood outside the bus during sunrise. The desert looked peaceful, glowing under soft morning light. The same place that once felt empty and threatening now felt familiar and calm. I realized something important. The bus had saved me, but I had also saved myself. Every decision to keep going, every repair, every difficult night had shaped who I had become. At 18, I thought my life had ended when I became homeless. Instead, it had begun. The abandoned bus was no longer a symbol of loss. It was proof that even the most forgotten things can find purpose again. As the wind moved gently across the sand, I smiled. Knowing that my story was no longer about survival alone, it was about transformation, resilience, and the unexpected ways life can rebuild us when everything else falls apart. I turned 18 on the same day my life completely changed. It wasn't the kind of birthday people celebrate with cake or friends. There were no candles, no laughter, no messages waiting on my phone. Instead, there was shouting, anger, and a silence that felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. One moment I was standing inside what I thought was my home, and the next I was outside, holding a backpack while the door closed behind me. I remember standing there for several minutes. Unsure of what had just happened, the evening air felt strange, like the world had suddenly become unfamiliar. Inside that backpack were only a few clothes, an old notebook, and some coins I had saved without knowing why. I thought maybe someone would come back outside and call me in again. No one did. As darkness slowly covered the sky, reality started sinking in. I had nowhere to go. Every place I could think of belonged to someone else. Friends had families. Relatives lived far away. Pride stopped me from asking for help, and fear pushed me forward onto the empty road. I started walking without a destination. Cars rushed past, their headlights briefly lighting my shadow before disappearing again. Each passing vehicle reminded me that life was moving forward for everyone. Else, while mine had suddenly stopped, the city lights faded behind me, replaced by open land and dry wind. By midnight, the temperature dropped sharply. The desert, which burned during the day, became painfully cold at night. I found a large rock and sat behind it, trying to block the wind. Hunger twisted my stomach, but exhaustion kept my body still. Every sound felt dangerous: shifting sand, distant animal cries, and the endless whisper of wind moving across empty land. That night taught me something important. A home is more than walls. It is safety. Without it, even silence feels threatening. When morning came, the rising sun painted the desert in pale gold. My throat was dry, and my legs ached, but I kept moving. I followed a dusty road, hoping it would lead somewhere useful. Around noon, I reached a small roadside stop where a tired shopkeeper sold water and snacks. I used almost all my money to buy a bottle of water and a piece of bread. It wasn't much, but it gave me strength to continue. For the next 2 days, I walked and rested, walked and rested. Sometimes trucks passed by without slowing down. Sometimes drivers stared but didn't stop. I began to feel invisible, like I no longer existed in the same world as everyone else. Doubt filled my mind. I wondered if leaving home had ended my future completely. On the third afternoon, under a blazing sun, I noticed something unusual far away between the dunes. At first, it looked like a strange shadow rising from the sand. Curiosity pulled me closer. With every step, the shape became clearer until I realized what I was looking at. It was a bus. Not a normal bus. This one looked ancient. Rust covered its metal body. Half of it was buried in sand, as if the desert had slowly tried to swallow it. The windows were shattered, and strips of old paint clung stubbornly to the sides. The tires were gone, leaving only broken rims pressed deep into the ground. I stopped a few meters away, unsure whether to feel relieved or afraid. The bus looked abandoned for decades, maybe even longer. Wind pushed against its frame, creating a long creaking sound that echoed across the empty land. Part of me wanted to walk away. Another part saw a possibility. Slowly, I approached the door. It hung slightly open, moving back and forth with the wind. I pushed it carefully, and it opened with a loud metallic groan. Dust rose into the air as I stepped inside. The interior was filled with sand. Torn seats leaned sideways, and old wires hung from the ceiling like forgotten vines. Sunlight entered through broken windows, creating bright lines across the dusty floor. The smell of rust and dry earth filled the air. Yet something felt different inside. The wind was weaker. The heat was less harsh. For the first time in days, I felt protected from the outside world. I walked slowly through the aisle, touching the seats, imagining what this bus must have looked like years ago when it carried passengers across long distances. Now it stood alone, forgotten, just like me. I sat down heavily on one of the seats and let out a long breath. My legs trembled from exhaustion. Without realizing it, I had already made my decision. I was staying. That evening, I used my backpack as a pillow and lay across 2 seats. Outside, the desert wind grew louder. But inside the bus, there was a strange calmness. I stared at the cracked ceiling, thinking about everything I had lost. Instead of fear, I felt something unexpected relief. At least I had shelter. Sleep came quickly. It was deep and uninterrupted. The kind of sleep that only comes after complete exhaustion. For the first time since leaving home, I felt safe enough to close my eyes fully. Morning sunlight woke me. Dust floated through golden beams of light, entering the broken windows. I sat up slowly and looked around with new eyes. The bus no longer looked like ruins. It looked like an opportunity. If I wanted to survive, I needed more than temporary shelter. I needed a plan. I began exploring every corner of the bus, checking what could still be used. Some seats were strong enough to support weight. Metal bars remained solid. Storage compartments above the seats still worked. Even the driver's area, though damaged, provided extra space. Ideas started forming in my mind. I could clean the sand. I could rearrange the seats. I could create a sleeping area. Maybe even collect water somehow. The thought of building something gave me energy I hadn't felt in days. That afternoon, I stepped outside and looked at the bus from a distance. Against the endless desert, it stood like a survivor, damaged but still standing. In that moment, I realized something powerful. This bus and I were the same, both abandoned, both forgotten, both still standing despite everything. I placed my hand against its warm metal surface and made a silent promise. I would not let this place remain broken. I would rebuild it, piece by piece, just as I would rebuild my own life. The desert wind moved around me, carrying sand across the ground. But for the first time since turning 18, I felt direction instead of fear. I wasn't just homeless anymore.